Hey everyone. Thanks to everyone who turned into the first recording of Telling Your Story to Make It Better. It was great, but technology sadly thwarted us, and we lost the first 15 minutes of video. Now we're refilming so that people who missed it can go back and watch. And we'll edit together with the second part of the workshop, which is still saved with all of your live questions and answers. So here we go. Thanks for tuning in to the third Make It Better summer session. As you know, if you've watched the first two broadcasts, my name's Irene, and the Make It Better summer campaign is part of the Make It Better project to end bullying against lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender youth. Our past two workshops can be found in the live stream video library or on the Make It Better summer section of makeitbetterproject.org. Today I have two new trainers joining me.
Hi y'all, I'm Ray and I'm a junior in high school.
Hey, I'm Sam and I'm also a junior in high school.
If you're part of the Make It Better summer Facebook group, which you should be, you might have seen us there since we're both admins and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Today we're here to talk about your story and how you can tell it to make it better. If you watch this broadcast to the end, you'll not only know how to tell your story, you'll also get a chance to win a prize to start this school year's organizing in style.
You might think of activism as marching in the streets or camping out in protest on a lawn in Washington, D.C. Those, of course, are types of activism, but that's not all there is. If you put some work into it, simply talking about your life and experiences is a form of activism.
Let's lay out a couple of examples of different types of people you could talk to, and by doing so, make it better.
You could tell your story to your principal, your teacher, or any person or group with power at your school. This is the kind of activism we discussed in the last workshop. You choose someone who you know could make a huge difference in your life if they took a specific action. Maybe the teachers in your school don't intervene when they hear homophobic slurs. If you tell your story about how you're bullied and how their intervention can help to your teacher, that might inspire them to start something or to start intervening. Or you could tell it to your principal, who could arrange a time for you to train your teachers. We've talked about how to start a campaign and how you might target the principal. This is how your story fits into that broader activism. Look up Make It Better Summer Session 2 to learn more.
Have you heard of lobbyists? They're the ones who present the opinions and experiences of one group of people to legislators and try to get the legislators to act in that group's interest. You might not have millions of dollars, but you can still lobby your legislator by telling your story and linking it to an action you want the legislator to take. For example, say your state is considering an anti-bullying law that you want your representative to vote for. You can tell him or her about how you're bullied in school because of your sexual orientation and that her vote can make school safer for everybody. You don't have to meet face-to-face with your legislator to do this. There are all sorts of ways to reach them.
Of course, there are all different kinds of ways to lobby. One thing you can do is petition your principal or legislator to take action. Choose an issue that you want them to act on and collect signatures supporting your point of view. For example, if your school had a Valentine's Day dance but didn't allow a female student to take her girlfriend, you could collect a bunch of letters asking the school to change the policy and put those letters together on a poster board in the shape of a heart. Then the student who is banned from going to the school dance with her girlfriend could present that giant heart to the principal as she tells her story. That way, she's using her story as a form of activism and also showing the widespread support she has behind her. So that's just one example of how you can go one step farther when trying to lobby a specific person. Now we're going to move on from lobbying individuals directly to sharing your story through the media. Before we do, we'll share some of the great questions and concerns that came up the first time around.
So, hey Irene, the heart thing sounds cool, but would it really work in all situations? Don't you need to be a bit more professional at times?
Yeah, this is just one example of many approaches you can take. In certain cases, you'll want to wear a suit or dress formally and collect formal signatures on nicely lined paper and appear very professional. It depends on the person you're petitioning and the situation you're in. Even petitioning is only one of the many ways to lobby. Use this example to start brainstorming on other ideas and share them with everyone on the Facebook group.
Hey Irene, do you have to tell your story if you don't want to? If you're not out yet, for example, or if you just don't feel comfortable talking about it?
No, absolutely not. You can still use these tips from the workshop to tell the story of what you see in school or what's happening to your friends and people you know. And that by itself will show why we need to make it better without using your own experiences. By sharing your personal story, you can often persuade more people by getting them to see and feel things from your point of view. But it's a personal choice, and only use your personal story if you're ready to advocate using it and sharing.
Okay, so those are some examples of individuals you can talk to directly to make a difference. There's a third option though. Tell your story to the media. This gets a bit more complicated. When you're talking to your principal, you know exactly who you're talking to and what you want from them. Who are you really talking to when you're talking to the media? What is your goal as an activist in talking to the media?
Donald Trump might think otherwise, but the goal of talking to the media is not just to see your name in print, become a local celebrity, or give you a reason to Google yourself. The media is a tool through which you reach an audience. You want the reporter to broadcast your words because your voice will move the audience to action. It will change the way readers, listeners, or viewers think about and act on an issue that you care about. Telling your story is a form of activism, which, if done well, can inspire change.
Let's say, for example, that your GSA decides to hold a day of silence. Normally, only the people in your school, your teachers, your classmates would know what you're doing, and may not even know why. But this time, a local newspaper is interested in writing about it. This is an opportunity to teach everyone in your town about the problems you face as an LGBT or ally youth. But when the reporter interviews you, the day after, of course, you just say, "I'm silent for LGBT rights."
What will the rest of your town get from that? They'll probably figure that you're unhappy with something, but they won't learn much more. If you know how to tell your story in a way that explains the problem you're fighting for, and suggests how others can help you, you can accomplish more. So our goals today are: tell your story as part of the bigger story of a problem in society and use it to advocate for change. Learn to tailor your story or message to different types of people, and understand the values that connect you to the other people and the barriers that divide you.
But the most important thing for you to remember is that you don't have to talk to the media if you're not comfortable doing so. Also, if you agree to talk to a reporter, but then they ask something that makes you feel uncomfortable, you don't have to answer. Your story is your own, and you decide what you want to be shared and what you don't want to share.
Before you start talking about a specific law or incident, you need to explain who you are and why people should listen to you. This speech should last no more than 2 minutes and can even be as short as 30 seconds, which is the length of an elevator ride. That's why it's called an elevator pitch in the business world. In the activist world, we also call it your public narrative. There are 3 main points that you should aim to hit on in your public narrative. Number 1,
The story of self.
Number 2, story of us.
And number 3, the story of now.
The story of self establishes your authority to speak about LGBT youth issues. Identify yourself, name, age, school, where you come from, and your experience as an LGBT youth or ally.
For example,
Character. My name is Kurt Hummel, and I used to go to McKinley High School in Lima, Ohio, but when I was 17, I was targeted by other students for being gay and bullied so much that I felt unsafe. I had to transfer to another school, giving up my friends and my wildly successful career in the Glee Club at McKinley.
Alright, that's it for this section, and we're going back to the original video. Sorry about the interruption. Kurt Hummel over here just demonstrated how to tell the story of self, which establishes your authority to speak about LGBT youth issues. Next, we're going to move on to the story of us. What's the story of your generation? Connect your story to the general experience of other LGBT youth and or allies. You want to show that you're not the only person who has this problem. This is a wider issue that the country needs to address. So going back to Kurt over here.
I wish I could say that I was the only one to have such an awful experience, but bullying is a problem that affects 90% of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender youth. In fact, I was one of the luckier ones because I was able to transfer to a safer private school. Many don't have that option. As last fall's headlines about LGBT youth deaths by suicide show, there are often tragic consequences due to bullying.
Finally, this leads into your story of now. Define your issue. What's happening now in this country that needs to be addressed? What do you want for people to act on? What should they do right now? Let's turn back to our friend Kurt.
That's why I'm a passionate advocate for LGBT youth. We can and we need to create safer schools for all students by training teachers in how to stop bullying when they see it.
Your story is the foundation for everything else you do as an activist in the media or in trying to persuade others, so it's good to have one ready. We'll email a worksheet to everybody who signed up for the Make It Better Summer, so you can all work on it yourselves. Try writing them and post them on the Facebook group. The three of us will edit your story and give you feedback if you put it up.
To make you more comfortable with this, I'm going to quickly tell my story of self, us, and now. I'll hold up one finger and start my story of self, 2 when I transition to my story of us, and 3 when I present the story of now. Put together, these 3 pieces become my public narrative, or activist story. Feel free to use it as a guide in writing your own. My name is Raymond Farinado. I am a junior at Antioch High School in Antioch, California. My life has been dedicated to sports, mainly baseball, but after I came out as a gay student, I was highly discouraged from trying out for my high school baseball team because it would make others feel uncomfortable. I tried out anyway and was harassed and bullied by players and even coaches. I was ultimately embarrassed and decided to quit baseball. Homophobia in sports is very common in high schools and even colleges throughout the United States. The bullying of LGBTQ athletes is a huge problem because it may ruin a future career for some and may contribute to built-up frustration that could result in suicide. With coaches not being held responsible for the harassment of LGBTQ athletes, I believe that an unsafe environment can be developed for all athletes. By creating laws that make coaches liable for the harassment of any of their athletes, I believe that sports can become more accepting and LGBTQ athletes will be in less danger.
Does anyone have any questions about writing your story of self, us, and now?
I have had one question come in so far, which is people are concerned that if they don't want to out themselves to reporters, do they have to tell their story? Do they have to admit that they are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, or are there ways for them to tell their story or to decide not to talk to reporters even, or and use their story in other contexts that they're more comfortable using it if they want to?
Yeah, one thing you can do when talking to the media is that if you don't want to tell your own story, you can tell someone else's story, or you can tell your story by saying, I have a friend who, or if you don't want to talk to the media, you can just say, no, thank you, I don't want to talk to you.
Mm-hmm. You can also try sending anonymous letters to the editor or something like that, and get your story across that way.
And one thing I'd like to add is that if reporters ask you questions that make you feel uncomfortable, you can always just shut down and say nothing, and there's nothing they can do about that.
Yeah, that's totally true. All right, so the rest of the workshop will focus on tips for tailoring your story for different audiences and making it easier for the media to understand. These tips might help make your story even better, but even if you forget them, you should feel confident just with your story.
When making an argument, it's important to understand what type of person you are and where you're coming from. But it's just as important to understand the point of view of the other person. When we create our media messages, we have to balance between our personal point of view and that of the audience we're trying to reach. In order to do that, we have to understand our audience. For example, Let's say I'm a transgender activist, and Irene is a woman who has never heard of the gender binary or gender identity or gender expression. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, go back and watch Make It Better Summer Session 1. This is how you would not want the scene to go. Don't forget the T. Support gender-neutral bathrooms so that transgender people are protected, not just the LGBs.
What is LGB? What? No way. This guy came into my bathroom in college and totally puked all over the place. It was gross. Women's bathrooms are perfectly fine without men. Thanks.
Everything I mentioned was outside the experience and values of Irene. That argument didn't give her any idea of the experiences transgender people face, and certainly didn't make her understand why gender-neutral bathrooms are needed. If anything, she probably came away thinking that LGBT issues have nothing to do with her.
That's why you need to think about who your audience is before you decide which words, phrases, and arguments you'll use in persuading them.
There are 3 broad categories of audiences. 1, the base.
2, the opposition.
And 3, the movable middle.
I'm your base. I'm that loyal person who will always cheer when you speak, retweet your tweets, like your Facebook posts, and volunteer for events you throw. I agree with you. When speaking to me, you should try to motivate me to go above and beyond my usual enthusiastic efforts. We're here, we're queer, get used to it.
I'm your opposition. Get used to that. I don't care what argument you make, I think that what you're doing is wrong, and I will not let you finish your sentence and continue corrupting our listeners. They should be listening to me, me, me.
I'm the movable middle. All I know about your cause is that this guy is really loud and cheering on it, and she's even more loud and shouting you down. Other than that, I don't really have much of an opinion. I'm open to listening to people speak reasonably.
So aside from me, who might be an example of your base if you were giving a message on anti-bullying legislation?
So we have one contribution of it could be a teacher or parent or something, and another contribution of your GSA, loyal friends, and even those who aren't as passionate as you are will often support you. And there's another person who's asking if you could kind of go back and explain base again a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So your base is someone who's already loyal to your side of to your side of the issue. Yeah, it's someone that you don't really need to convince because they're already there fighting with you.
Okay, so what do you think of those examples that people gave? The GSA, loyal friends, and your mom.
Yeah, totally. Those are all right. Your base consists of those who are already supportive of your community or your issues. You don't need to change their minds, just energize them.
Right. So who might be an example of your opposition if you were giving a message on anti-bullying legislation?
Someone contributes their principal. Another person contributes George Rakers, who is the head of a very conservative group, or was the head of a very conservative group. And yeah, so yeah, how do you feel about those?
Right, so that's really good. It might be your principal or some really conservative politician or even your conservative local newspaper who doesn't like the fact that you guys are getting media attention. So your opposition is basically those who actively oppose your community and your issues. You're probably not going to be able to change their minds.
Now, who might be an example of the movable middle if you were giving a message on anti-bullying legislation?
Okay, two comments here. One, we have some people asking you to speak up a little bit, so we'll do that. And then movable middle examples are classmates and friendly teachers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, your peers are a really good example of the movable middle. There's also newspapers like the LA Times and the audience that it reaches. Basically, the movable middle are those who are neither entirely supportive nor rigidly against your community. Or they're also those who feel emotionally conflicted in some way over it. In some cases, your message can play a role in changing their minds about your community or your issues.
So how do you decide who to talk to and what to say to them? Or of those three categories, which should you focus on?
Okay, we have the opposition or the movable middle as an answer. And then another contribution saying definitely focus on the movable middle. Do you want to talk about why maybe the opposition wouldn't be the best one to focus on?
Yeah, the thing is, it's possible to convince the opposition, but it's much easier and you're much more likely to convince the movable middle because you can sway them one way or another.
Okay. Well, now let's move on into how you can appeal to those different kinds of audiences. First, though, does anyone have any questions about what those audiences are?
I don't think there are any questions.
Cool. Okay, so let's talk about values. You might have an amazing story, but unless you can put it into words your audience will understand, they won't listen to your message. You need to find a common ground and connect to your audience in their own terms. So, once you've figured out who your audience is, you need to determine their values. What are your audience's beliefs on the topic? What do they value? This is a message you use to get the door open by appealing to a value they hold.
Now, why might your audience not want to listen to you or do what you want? Barriers are things that make your audience shut down and stop listening. Lots of times, they're misconceptions that the audience has about you, or just things they're not familiar with yet. Think of each audience as having a moral pro-con list. There are pro things that fit within their world and appeal to their values. If they think something contradicts those values, though, they're against it. Those are barriers between you and your audience. So pros, values, cons, barriers.
Your opponent will often try to create or reinforce the barriers that already exist between you and your audience. When, for example, our opponents talk talk to conservative, family values audiences, and refer to LGBT people as recruiters, they're painting us as a threat. We're foreign invaders who must be stopped. When we make it clear that LGBT people are actually children, parents, sisters, brothers, we place ourselves firmly back into the world and values of the audience.
So then, in crafting your message, you want to use value words. Value words are words that appeal to a bunch of different people. Values that almost nobody will argue with, even though each person might have a stronger opinion about one value word over another. For example, nobody objects to the word freedom, and conservatives especially treasure that word. But many of them object to the idea of special rights. Have any of you heard of the organization Freedom to Marry? Instead of saying we should give gay couples the right to be married, which an anti-LGBT audience would interpret as a special right, they say all people should have the freedom to marry. So freedom could be a value word with special rights as a barrier.
Okay, so let's do a few scenarios. You are advocating for safer schools for LGBT youth, and I'm president of my school's GSA. First of all, what type of audience am I?
Okay, we have someone asking if you could repeat the question.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so this is a scenario. You are advocating for safer schools for LGBT youth, and I'm president of my school's GSA. First of all, what type of audience am I?
And the options are base, movable middle, and opposition.
Base, we have this an answer.
Correct. So what values would you emphasize in talking to me?
Maybe throw out one example so we can get people started.
Sure. So when talking to me, your GSA president, a good example of a value that you would try to convince me with is possibly student leadership.
We have a few more answers here. Safety, the rights of students, and the opportunity to do something important with your position, which sounds a lot like student leadership, so great. And we have a question here of whether freedom would be a good value to appeal to.
Freedom, yeah, of course, that would be an awesome one. Some other good values are learning, gaining visibility, and safe environments.
Okay, so let's try something similar. You're still the same person, but this time you're talking to me. I'm a conservative, concerned parent and activist for Christian morals in schools. What are some barriers I might have that would prevent me from listening to you? What values of mine would you appeal to? How could you connect those values to your How could you connect the values to your case?
I think that might be a better case for freedom.
Yeah, I think so too, because if you ask me, like, do you think, and if we're talking about safer schools, like the scenario was, I can't really argue that everyone should feel safe in school. Like, that's a value that I have, but maybe I won't say that I won't agree with if you say LGBT kids should have safe schools. Like, So if you make it broad, like a word like freedom, which is really broad, that would help connect to my values.
So you could say, for example, every student should be free to attend school without feeling like they're in danger.
Right.
All right, next scenario. You're still you, but I'm a math teacher at a middle school. I don't really follow politics. I only have a vague idea of what LGBT stands for, and I haven't given much thought to bullying at all. What could you say to get me interested, to connect this issue to my everyday values? What should you avoid saying because it would put up a barrier between us?
I should avoid making you seem like a bad person just because you don't know a lot, is one answer.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's a great one. That is something that comes up a lot with with using the acronym LGBT when people don't know what LGBT means, and you need to actually explain what that is so that they don't feel like they're too dumb for you.
Yeah. Yes, try your best to reach out to them and be conscious of what they know and what they don't know.
Avoid pointing to people and suggesting that they could be gay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, great job everyone. Those were great answers. Now we're going to try the same process again, but with a different non-LGBT related issue. This time, you're arguing for the importance of providing healthy school lunches to all students.
What should you tell me, the president of my GSA, to get me on board? What values should you try to reach?
Can you repeat that one?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so what should you tell me, the president of your GSA, to get me on board? What values should you try to reach for me?
When you're arguing for safe and healthy school lunches, as opposed to arguing to anything that's related to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender youth. So we have nutrition and non-obesity.
Yeah, those are great examples.
Okay, so let's try me. I'm still a concerned, God-loving parent activist. What would make me object to this? What values could you appeal to overcome that?
That we're all people?
Yeah. So maybe things like, maybe since I'm a parent of the school, maybe my kids like the school lunches and kids shouldn't have their favorite cafeteria food taken away from them. Or maybe I don't think that the school should control what people eat.
All right, so how are you going to connect school lunches to fractions? Okay, well, this is a problem that I might not have realized existed because I'm a math teacher and I'm focused on just teaching math. But I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other about the school lunches.
So in that case, it would be fairly similar arguments, right? What do you think would be some examples?
I think saying, healthy school lunches for everyone is still a great value.
Okay, so does anyone have any questions about audiences or the value you appeal to when talking to them?
Yeah, there was a question a little bit earlier about whether it's trying to convert people when you're doing this. Is it trying to convert people, or what really is your goal in talking to people and using words that put it in a language that they understand?
Well, you're not necessarily converting people. You could just be opening their eyes to something maybe they've never thought about, or maybe showing them a different point of view that they could think about.
All right, I hope that helped you understand how to tell your story to different types of people. If you just remember your story and your purpose as an activist, which is to get across a message, you'll do great. Even if you don't talk to the media in a month, a year, or even a decade, your story will still prepare you for all sorts of situations. You can use these tips to persuade others, with or without the media's help. If you stand up and give a story, if you tell your story at a school board meeting, for example, it can be just as effective as talking to the local newspaper.
Right. So let's wrap up by brainstorming a little bit. Can you think of some creative ways or situations in which you can use your story?
Do you want to give one example so people understand a little bit more what context you're talking about?
Yeah, like if I want to tell my story to the local newspaper, I can write a letter to the editor of the local paper.
Instead of getting interviewed by the media. So it's just slightly different.
Or say for English class we have to write speeches and we can pick our topic. Maybe I'll write it about LGBT bullying in schools and tell my story about it.
We have another suggestion, which is to make a video like the It Gets Better video.
Yeah, or even a Make It Better video. Yeah, and tell how you're making it better and how everyone else should too.
You can also talk with your principal, just have an informal conversation about it, about problems in your school.
You can form an assembly for the school and talk about the issues you're having.
A Facebook post.
Any other contributions from the chat?
To put yourself out there. And we have another question that's more general. And another suggestion is to be someone that people can approach for support.
Yeah.
Definitely.
That's really valuable.
We have another question here from someone who's asking, do you feel alone sometimes, and how do you reach out to people, and how do you combat feeling alone with this stuff?
The best thing you could do, since you're already here, is maybe just reach out through Facebook on the Make It Better group. Me, Irene, and Sam are always here to talk to you, whether you're going through problems or just need advice in the smallest things. Or join your GSA club, or start one.
I think what they're also asking is that I'm getting some clarification. Like if you're the have you ever felt alone? Like have you ever struggled with that? And like feeling that you're the only one in the city who's out. Is that an experience that...
Definitely. Yeah. Growing up, mainly through elementary school and middle school, I always sort of knew that I was gay, so I would have to sort of try to pretend to be this really masculine kid that, you know, chases girls around and plays sports. So I did feel very alone because I didn't have any gay role models in my life. And but once I started high school and going to my GSA club, I really felt a part of the group, and I felt like I had like a whole new family that was there for support.
Yeah, sometimes it can take a while to find your niche, that little group of people that you fit in with, and it's totally normal to feel alone, and it doesn't feel good, but have faith and remember that you can always work to make it better and change your situation.
And then there's some serious talk going on in the chat, and I mean, talk not just about your personal struggles, but having friends with struggles too. And so it's good to know that you can reach out and help out your friend as well, and that just as there are resources for you to turn to if you're feeling like you're in crisis, the Trevor Project obviously is a great resource. We have tons of resources on the Make It Better Project site under For Youth and under Get Help that I really encourage everyone to look at if they're feeling alone, and if they're feeling like really in a difficult spot, or if they have a friend who is. But in the meantime, other strategies just to keep you going throughout the day, just to keep you going, and doing activism in your town can really contribute to feeling much better and much less alone, because you have activists like sitting right in front of you, right in front of this camera, who dealt with similar issues and who are here to support you and on the Facebook page to support you.
One tip that I have, it sounds really, really strange, but for me, just coming to terms with my sexuality, I had to constantly tell myself that I'm gay, and I would basically, when nobody was around, of course, scream it at the top of my lungs, and it really helps build confidence within yourself, and it really makes you just feel more comfortable even saying the word gay.
Yeah, I agree. I struggled a long time with questioning my sexuality, and it was terrible for my self-confidence, but just know that you can't rush it, and it's a process that a lot of us have to go through in one way or another, whether it's sexuality or something else, and just feel comfortable being uncomfortable. Like, embrace the process.
Yeah, and if you have friends who you think are going through problems like that, like for me, I have a lot of LGBT friends, and I make sure that all my friends know that if they ever want to talk, they can call me whenever they want and just talk and just say whatever's on their mind, and I know that I can do that for them too.
So it's always good to be constantly reaching out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's sometimes good to, if you're really worried about a friend, to reach out to someone else, to a teacher or to somebody, an adult who you think is responsible and who you think will not react badly, to someone that you trust, to kind of take a look at the situation and possibly intervene if it's really a crisis.
Yeah, it's important to know that you can't always do everything, and sometimes it's okay to ask someone else for help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that doesn't mean that you have to out him. If you have a friend that's going through that, you can just say that you're worried about them. You can just say that that you think he might be going through something, and that you think that he might need a little bit of help. But you don't have to out him if you think that's not safe for him.
Totally.
I think that's all the questions for right now, but I think this is also a good conversation to keep going on the Facebook group. And I'm going to put the link back into the Facebook group again, just so that this conversation doesn't end because the broadcast ends. There are, again, tons of people on the Facebook group who have been youth trainers who have been dealing with this for a long time and really have lots of great tips and advice and support to offer.
Awesome.
All right, so we're going to move on right now in the broadcast, but like Jill said, the conversation can keep on going. Just post on the Facebook group, or you can send one of us admins a personal message if you don't want it to be public on the group. Okay, so for this session's prize, the first person to draft and post their public narrative or their activist story, the story of Self, Us, and Now, to the Make It Better Summer Campaign Facebook group will win a special prize to help them make it better at the start of this school year.
So, thanks everyone for tuning in. Remember to join next week when youth from the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, will be here to discuss how you can fight for your legal rights.